think it's time for us all to get started. Thank you everyone who's on the call joining us today. I'm sure people are just going to start coming in as time goes on. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing our screen. I'm Kerry. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Searchlight. Hoping all of you and your loved ones are as safe as possible with everything happening. It's certainly an unprecedented time. Our mission at Searchlight is to help companies build the best teams by unlocking insights from professional references. And we just started hearing so many of the same questions from our user communities. That's why we organized this webinar to talk about the challenges of remote hiring during these unique times and hopefully provide some support and guidance. To give some context on who's watching today, we have several hundred people live, a mix of recruiters, hiring managers, candidates, and company leadership. We're going to be discussing topics relevant to all of these different groups. We're also recording so that we can share the content afterwards. Very glad to be joined today by three brilliant talent leaders who have graciously volunteered their time to share their expertise with us. We have Dave Gilbert. Dave is the VP of Global Recruiting at Gitlab. They are the largest totally remote company with over 1,000 employees. We have Evan Connor. He's the head of homes recruiting at Airbnb. They have about 7,500 employees worldwide. They're centralized with global offices. And then Fadi Hindi. Fadi is the head of people strategy and operations at Udemy. Around 650 employees, also centralized with remote offices. And both Airbnb and Udemy have had to pivot to 100% remote hiring in the last few weeks. So thank you and welcome to all three of you.
Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks, Kerry.
Awesome. So to give everyone a sense of our format today, we are separating this webinar on remote hiring, what's different now, into three parts. First, it'll be on recruiting teams. Second, it's going to be on hiring managers and candidates. And third, it's going to be on strategy and comms. For each section, I'm going to start by asking one of the panelists a question and then just let the discussion go from there. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions during registration. We did add those questions throughout this webinar. And if there's time, we are going to ask a few of the questions that people submit during the Q&A. Let's dive in. Let's start by talking about recruiting teams. All right, so Dave, I want to start with you. You've led several talent organizations throughout your career, and now at Gitlab, you're leading hiring for a fully remote team. With many of our viewers suddenly adjusting to distributed work and hiring, Gitlab's resources online have been a huge support system. I'm really curious though to talk about what's unique during these times. What has your team had to change in response to COVID-19?
Thanks for the question, Kerry. And I would say the first emphasis that we're placing, and it's not necessarily a change for us, we've always been a people-first culture. It's one of the things that attracted me to Gitlab. I remember my first interview with the CEO, he asked me what attracted me to the company. And I talked about the opportunity to reunite my family. We'd been straddling the mountains of Colorado and Utah for a role that I was in for over 4 years with a wonderful company. However, geographically, there were some challenges and some stressors on the family. And his answer to me about how that answer was exactly in line with GitLab's people-first culture resonates when you ask me that question. So this is a time for our business and hopefully every business to double down on people, double down on empathy. People, as you described in your intro, are feeling unprecedented levels of stress and anxiety. And so starting every conversation with the basic questions of, are you okay? Do you have what you need? What could I be doing to help you find more success? And to also normalize the expectation that people are now maybe home for the first time. In our world, many were already home, but they have kids home with them who no longer are able to go to school or have daycare options available. So making sure that it's okay for there to be kids and dogs and other distractions in the background for our teams, and enabling opportunities for people to come together, not just to be productive and drive work agendas, but also just for social time. We started, and we'll iterate on this, it's one of our values, maybe do it less or not at all, but right now, 3 days a week, we're doing what I'm calling remote social undistancing time for my teams around the world. And it's no agenda, no documentation, unlike all other GitLab meetings. It's just a time to get together and connect during a time when a lot of folks are feeling anxiety, isolation, and loneliness.
Wow, thanks for sharing. And I really think being people first is a tremendous value to have to make sure everyone feels still connected. And to dive a little further, recruiting teams have always been on pretty much the front lines of a company, interacting with candidates who are external. What has your recruiting team had to do to adapt during this time?
Is that me again?
Yes, you can start off and then of course open it up to Fadi and Evan.
So same humanity first, right? Our candidates are experiencing that stress and anxiety. And so we are very mindful about that in our interactions with candidates, even made some updates to our handbook and some outbound communications to our candidate community to let them know that it's okay for them to have distractions in the background, or if they need to pause the process with us, we're understanding about that too, and show that it's a great time to bring your values as a company front and center. So for GitLab, those values very much include that people first mindset and making sure that our candidates understand that they're interacting with an organization that rolls that way, even during stressful times, will create the same experience for candidates that I had with our CEO in my very first meeting with them.
Wow. So I hope we can provide some comfort to recruiting teams during these challenging times. Are there analogous situations that any of you have faced in the past and overcome? Evan, how about let's start with you. I feel like you told me a little bit about your experience at Facebook with Cambridge Analytica. What was that like?
Yeah, so 2 months after joining Facebook, the news about Cambridge Analytica, the data breach came out. And it was obviously, pretty, challenging, intense time for all of us internally. And so a few days later, I was asked to help lead a hiring sprint that involved essentially hiring hundreds of employees who could work to help fight misinformation across Facebook's family of apps. And again, it was very tense. There was a lot of headwind, and it made recruiting extremely difficult during the time. It was an all hands deck approach across the company.
What did you do?
To streamline hiring for the initiative, there wasn't like a silver bullet per se. We developed a multi-pronged approach to help solve for the business. So we had to tackle the challenge from several different angles and pull any and all levers that we had to help accelerate hiring for this specific initiative.
And what stood out as the biggest successes there, so that we can all learn from what the ideal outcomes can look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think there's probably three things that come to mind for me. One, through the amazing work of everybody that was involved, we created a global talent hunt to mine the networks of our employees with giving employees specific tools in place where they could come and sit down and surface their first and second degree connections who had backgrounds in spam and fraud and abuse and privacy and security. This generated a tremendous number of leads and interviews for us that we wouldn't have previously had. Another one was we were also able to work with several future new hires who were slated to start in the following few quarters, and basically call them, share the critical business need with them around what was happening at the company, and ask them to move up their start dates to help support some of these efforts and soft pre-allocate to these teams. So that was another lever that we pulled, which really helped. And then I think last, we started doing cell calls earlier with leaders sooner in the process, and began pitching and steering candidates to business critical roles that we needed to spin up some of these teams for. So I think, again, thanks to the deep collaboration between multiple teams across like multiple sites globally, like we were able to accelerate hiring for this sprint, and it was a huge success.
So, I mean, today there's certainly companies who are doubling down on hiring. They're seeing a competitive advantage to going out into the market. For everyone, what advice would you have for those talent teams in that situation?
I would say echo to what Dave was saying and lead with empathy. He was talking about like the human touch. I think one of the things I would emphasize is like, how do you lead with empathy versus sympathy? I think right now we're in a time where unemployment is at its highest. So our natural human instinct is to go the sympathetic route, but the more ideal route to be proactive is like, put yourself in that candidate's shoe. If you were that candidate right now, what would your experience, what would you want your experience to be like? And that's kind of how we need to lead our teams through empathy to figure out like, if the next 3 or 4 months have to be remote only, what does that look like? How do we change the candidate experience so that it's the most effective for remote hiring? If candidates can't see our office, what are different ways we can show them our office? If candidates can't physically touch my hand and shake my hand, what are other ways we can comfort them? I think we really had to lead with empathy and figure out how do we get our recruiting team, which is the front line, to do that and set that example. And then lastly, I would say it's the feedback loop. Almost like an engineering team where you're constantly doing a feedback loop and iterating on a weekly or daily basis. Same thing with recruiting. It needs to run very agile right now. And it has to keep the feedback loop open with like candidates, hiring managers, and themselves so that they can start to figure out what's working, what's not working, and iterate on a daily basis and just keep prototyping and figuring out like, what is that experience like and how can I keep improving it?
What are specific measures that Udemy has implemented during this time that keeps that feedback loop open?
We're emphasizing a lot on like candidate surveys. We're rephrasing our questions. They used to be like, you know, how is your on-site experience, all that stuff. Now they're more tailored to like the actual virtual experience. We're taking notes of every single thing and trying to figure out what's, and identify like an NPS score around what's good, what's not. And then from there, trying to, on a weekly basis, improve. So for example, I'm sure a lot of people are facing this right now, but a lot of companies are using Zoom. I mean, it's either Zoom or Google Hangout for the most part. And no offense to Zoom, but they're kind of crashing right now because they never expected this type of workload for like all of America to be on their product. And so we see issues on a daily basis of how it integrates with our ATS. We use Lever and the glitches that it has. And we basically got our recruiting coordinators to almost be like troops and just like try to figure out how to like attack the problem like in real time, take notes, and then keep that feedback loop open within our teams so that they can figure out like, hey, recruiters, every time you hear something from a candidate, let me know and put it on a sheet so that we can start to figure out what are the trends of problems and issues and how do we improve on them. And those are some quick wins that we've seen is just from both hearing the candidate side, but also the recruiter side, and then adding them up and trying to figure out on right now what's a must-have and what's a nice-to-have.
Yeah, and can you share what platform you use for your employee surveys?
Yeah, we use Survey.
Or the candidate surveys.
Yeah, we use SurveyMonkey at the moment. It's integrated through our Lever system. And through there, we're able to look at the analytics around what's positive, what's negative, and just looking at the comments and everything. And that's kind of kept our feedback loop open. And it's, like I said, it's an iterative process. It's not the best like one-stop shop idea, but it's a start.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Dave, what about you?
Everything Fadi said for sure, but even with regard to feedback loops, I think over communication and helping candidates to understand the commitment we have to them throughout every stage of the process, up through and beyond the accepted offer stage, where we're making just a concerted effort just this week to ask hiring managers and recruiters to reach out to candidates who have accepted and not yet started, to ensure that they know and feel that things are solid with regard to the commitment that we've made to have them join our team. We've been recording videos and sharing those to express enthusiasm and to make sure they know how welcome and how excited we are about the prospect of having them become Gitlabbers, whether it's next week or next month, so that the fear and uncertainty of a job change as not something that starts to create undue anxiety for them about leaving the company they're with to join the company that they're about to become a part of.
We're in the exact same boat right now as well. We have 2 awesome people starting next week, and it's all about helping them feel welcome. So far, we talked a lot about how do we help recruiting teams still stay on top of hiring plans, even some of them accelerating hiring plans. But I do know of teams out there that are balancing uncertainty around hiring goals right now. And there is a tough balance to strike between those uncertain goals and the need to keep pipeline moving. So what advice can you give for the talent teams in that situation right now?
I think for me, what stands out is recruiting is a social activity, right? And we should constantly be networking with top talent. And so if this is an opportunity to really so for one, we can step back and we can look at the processes that we have in place. Do we need to iterate? Is there an opportunity? We've been moving so quickly that now we have an opportunity to slow down a little bit. There's some breathing room. Can we rebuild our processes? Do we need to take a look at how we're interviewing, how we're assessing? Is this an opportunity to train our hiring managers and our hiring teams on diversity and inclusion, initiatives, just any kind of like training that we can focus on. Talent mapping is probably another big investment area right now, where this is a great opportunity to be able to take a holistic look at where are the pockets of talent, how can we attract the talent, right? Getting a comprehensive understanding of what the landscape looks like in the market. And then I think the last thing would be continuing to have passive sell calls with great candidates that may or may not be looking for a change right now, but being able to connect those candidates with hiring leaders and continuing those conversations so that when there is an opportunity that does arise, that we've already had the conversations going and that we can just circle back with them and present a role when the timing is right.
Yeah, I would echo what Evan just said. And just to add some more context, at least from the Udemy side, if there are candidates on this call right now, I think a lot of candidates are in their head going like, oh, there's a lot of companies having hiring freezes or hiring is on hold right now and it's slowing down. The advice I would give candidates at the moment is that right now the economy is just in a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of companies are taking different approaches. Some are freezing fully, some are like in the middle, slowing down / being strategic, and some are going as fast as possible because they're trying to take advantage of it. And every company has a different thing, because there's a phrase out there or a statement out there that goes, cash is king. Right now, companies are trying to figure out like, how much cash can I preserve in the case this goes longer than 6, 7, 8 months. And so don't take that as a negative thing. I think you just need to take your approach differently. Like, for example, I've never thought about, if I was a candidate right now, thinking through like, which company is virus prone? Like, I would have never thought about that, but it does make a difference now. Like, you have to think about like, what is the actual product that's built at the moment? Is it a physical product? Is it a virtual product? What kind of company is it? Like, for example, at Udemy, we're blessed. We got lucky that we are an online e-learning platform, and we're seeing users go through the roof and skyrocket. So for us, like, the virus actually had a positive impact on our company, and I'm very blessed that we got that. And so my advice is, not every company is going to freak out and stop hiring. So don't give up on applying. Like, there is an incredible amount of opportunity out there. I would just say, really look into the idea of like, what does the company do? What is its product in the market? And what's its long-term effect in the market as well? Because that does make a difference, and that might help you go on the right path of which company to like apply to, because it does make a difference. And then the other thing to add to Evan's point is just like transparency. We're kind of doing something similar at Udemy, where we're trying to focus our recruiters on the must-have roles and the ones that are super active right now, and put our sourcers on these roles that we're thinking about, pushing out a little bit or slowing down on, to be strategic, to like Evan's point, talent map, get those passive candidates to be warm so that when the economy goes back to normal again, you just execute.
So I'm hearing you correctly. It's don't stop talking to the candidates, keep the pipelines going, but just be transparent on whether or not this role is something you're actively hiring for at the moment. or something that you would look and circle back on in a few months?
Yeah.
Perfect. And are there any specific tips to help you guys with productive conversations with passive candidates throughout this? That was a specific question we got during registration.
So sorry, Kerry, the question is specific questions around like tips for candidates just in the—
tips, yeah, sorry, tips for recruiting teams reaching out to passive candidates through this.
Yeah, for me, it would be, you know, really emphasizing the key talking points for your business and for your company. And so being able to have a really great story to tell, that while this is a moment in time and this is disruptive, that we will get through this. And once we do get through this, we hope to be back to business as usual. And a lot of companies have very long-term, you know, 5 and 10 and 15-year roadmaps. And so being able to speak to those roadmaps, being able to speak to the industries, you know, for us specifically, the travel industry is extremely resilient. And, you know, I think, you know, that those being able to emphasize those talking points, you know, is also helpful.
Thanks, Evan.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. And the relationship opportunity that companies have to connect with top talent that align with their values and are additive to their cultures, those are the opportunities that right now are front and center for us and should be for all companies, whether you're hiring today or not. We are, and we are also shifting our focus. We're doubling down on diversity. We're doubling down on global marketplaces. We have 1,200 plus team members today in 67 countries, and we're using this as a place to reach out and connect proactively with the very best people in the world and introduce them to the world's largest all-remote company. The other thing Gitlab is doing is also sharing its knowledge and its tool set and its methodologies for remote-based work very openly with the world. And we did that long before any of us could spell coronavirus, just because it's representative of our value of transparency. So putting those tools forward in a way that is really altruistic and all about making teams and candidates aware of who we are just sets the stage for that kind of interaction to become natural if it's a fit mutually for candidates and the company to engage about a role that may or may not be open today. Tomorrow, we're building a company that's going to be generational.
I love that. Thank you. And with that, I think that's actually a great place to move on to part 2, which is around hiring managers and candidates. And thank you to Fadi and Dave and Evan for already talking about what are the common concerns that candidates are feeling during this time. But just to start off, Fadi, at Udemy, you're heading people strategy and operations at a centralized company that has had to adjust suddenly to hiring remotely. You shared with me how even last week you were interviewing a candidate for your own team. How are you feeling about remote hiring as a hiring manager? What are the biggest challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think every hiring manager is going to be different. There are hiring managers that are honestly a little scared to move forward the candidate right now just because they can't physically be in front of them and see the body language, shake their hand. And there are other hiring managers that this doesn't faze them and this doesn't bother them. And so there's some in the middle. And my advice is, one, to a recruiting team is what are the tools you can provide your hiring manager to make their decision-making a lot easier and smoother? That's like step one to think about. Is there a hiring manager playbook you can create? Is there a toolkit you can provide? Like those are the first things I would emphasize, because at Udemy, we have some hiring managers that are saying, you know what, I'm gonna put my role on hold until we're back in the office. But it's not the right approach because we don't know when we'll be back in the office. Like no one does. Like I'm not a pandemic expert. I can't tell you when this will be over. And so instead of being reactive, let's be proactive. Let's figure out like, hey, hiring manager, what do you need right now in this given moment, in this given environment that would make your decision making a lot easier? For me, when I was interviewing, we were currently looking for a people systems manager to join our team. And it was my first time doing like a true virtual interview panel. So I was learning as I go. And one thing that I noticed was I was a bit harsher on my questions, because one of the things I noticed was the candidates are really good about giving the what and the why, but sometimes the answers lack the how. And so I think how we as hiring managers need to do is change our questions and the style of the questions we're asking to uncover that how. So you can really find out, like if someone tells you I'm good at building trust or building relationships, how do you build trust? How do you build relationships? That's so much more important than the what they did. And so I think this is actually helping a lot of teams out there really revisit their entire interview panel, their interview focus areas, and being more strategic about like, is this focus area important? Is it not? And how am I asking this question? I'll share an example on our engineering team. One of our data science teams currently has a whiteboarding question. And you actually need a physical whiteboard to do the assignment. And we were trying to figure out another way to do that. We had things like the Zoom whiteboard, however, it's with your mouse, so it's really difficult to draw on. Another idea was, let's get a cheap tablet from Amazon and send it to the candidate. There was a lot of logistic nightmares behind that. And we're still trying to figure out what's the best answer to do this whiteboarding question. And so what I did was I went to the data science team, all the leaders there, and I asked them, what is the focus area of the whiteboard? Like, what are you trying to uncover from this candidate? And is there another way you can keep that same focus area, but change the question up to do it? And they started brainstorming. They realized they can do something on HackerRank. And that could still get them to the same point of view and not make the question easier or keep away from the focus area at all, but still get them the same end result. And that's the advice I want to give every hiring manager, is just revisit your interview panel, revisit your focus areas, and look at the type of questions you're asking. And that is the place to start first and see, like, are you able to get the right signals from these questions? If not, where can you probe to make those more enhanced and better? Because interviewing in person or virtual should be the same experience. It shouldn't make a difference.
That was awesome. I really love the sentiment that we can't pause hiring right now. There's no way that we know where this can end. And, you know, the risk of inertia right now is that critical open roles aren't getting filled, and also candidates aren't finding their next home. So thank you for sharing that, Fadi. Evan and Dave, anything that you can add on to that?
Just because Fadi mentioned it, it's a good time to remind hiring managers that shaking hands may not always have been the best idea, and that during this time, use your remote-based hiring process as a way in which to highlight your tools and culture. So I loved Fadi's example of what were you trying to get at with that whiteboard exercise, and how do we adapt that to a remote-based model? What we do with our candidates, and I had this experience as a candidate for Gitlab, is use our own tools as part of the hiring process itself. So all interviews are on Zoom. I think I had 14 interviews and or video interactions over Zoom, and never met anyone in person or shook hands during my candidacy to join this company. We'll use Google Docs, we'll use our product. So for certain technical roles, we'll have candidates create merge requests in GitLab as a way in which to realistically preview the role for them, and for us be able to assess their ability to interact with our product and with our tool set in a way that likely will be more predictive than unstructured interviews, which we know are not highly predictive. So lastly, I'd add, if you're going to do interviews over remote-based tools like Zoom or Google Hangouts or other tool sets that you use, make sure they're structured. And for us, structuring the interview questions around different dimensions of our values is a great way to assess alignment and match from a candidate perspective and from a company perspective.
I mean, going off of that, so one of the most popular questions that we actually got from the audience was, how do you read people and assess for this culture fit virtually? can we just dive a little bit deeper on that and share your thoughts with whoever, for the people who are watching?
So our values, rather than culture fit, which can be quite amorphous and easily susceptible to bias, I would ask organizations that are doing hiring to start to think about, what does culture fit really mean to Fadi's why question? What are you trying to get at? What are those dimensions? For GitLab, we want to know about collaboration, about results, about efficiency, about diversity and inclusion, about iteration, about transparency. Those are our core values. And we have structured ways to ask questions that will elicit behavioral examples that will help us evaluate in a less biased way if there is a great culture add and alignment between candidates that we're considering and our environment that we're building. I'd encourage teams to be thinking about structured ways to, if you haven't already done it, begin to concretize and structure your interview process remotely. And if you do go back to face-to-face office environments, it'll be well suited and only serve you well for the next chapters of your story.
Yeah, I would add to what Dave just said. So one of the things I love about Udemy is if you actually look up everyone's resumes, no one had a clear trajectory to where they belong today. Like, it is insane how everyone comes from a smorgasbord of background. And I love that. Like, that to us is diverse and it's very heterogeneous. And the reason why we've been able to handpick folks like this is because we really truly focus on our values, like mission inspired, result obsessed. We look for people that are always learning and just folks that can just figure it out on the fly. And so to Dave's point, like, focus on that a lot and try to be creative around your questions. Don't look for the same profile like everybody else. Like, look for folks that just are hungry, are eager, are willing to do the work that can be at that director level, but also like roll up their sleeves and get down on the ground and scrub the floor at the same time. Like, those are people you want on your team. You don't just want your perfect resume cookie cutter profile. And so I think to Dave's point is like, really revisit your values, really revisit your questions and make sure they align, because if you want more culture ads on your team, that's how you get it.
Absolutely. I mean, I love that, because our values at Searchlight, it's not about the resume, it's about the past performance, it's about what they've done and not where they've done it. And so I love that you're bringing that in your values. Dave, you did mention structure quite a bit. Like, make sure you structure your interviews. Are there any tactical tips and advice or platforms that you've done that with at GitLab that you can share with everyone?
An easy one is we're Greenhouse Shop in terms of an ATS provider. And within Greenhouse, there's a way to create an interview plan. So we can kind of very easily disaggregate what the expectations are for each interviewer and what they're going to assess, or if there are other written exercises or deep dives that we include that are non-interview sections of a hiring plan, we can break that up so that the different slices of a candidate experience can come together holistically at the point at which we debrief and get back together with a hiring manager to make a final decision. And then you're avoiding the risk of different interviewers asking candidates the exact same question inadvertently because they weren't sure what the expectation was of them in their part of the hiring process.
Absolutely. So I'm hearing Greenhouse is a really good platform with their structured interviewing packets. Evan and Fadi, you all had to pivot to remote hiring recently. What are measures that you've done to ensure structured interviewing during this transition?
So our structured interviewing hasn't necessarily changed. I mean, we still follow the same format. We have non-technical interviews and technical interviews. And then in addition, we have core value interviews, which have been going on since the company was founded. I think, the things that I think we encourage our core value interviewers to look for are moments in time when somebody can cite a moment in time where they were, can you tell me when you were a serial entrepreneur, right? Tell me what that looks like for you. I think being able to really point to those moments in time and be able to look for those concrete examples where people can speak to previous experiences that align to our core values. So like being a host is one of our core values. So talk me through what being a host means, to you, and how have you been a host in your life? And so it's trying to find that values alignment. I think to follow up on what Fadi said as well about the looking for the signal, one of the things we should be focusing on as well is in our debriefs and our roundups after the interviews, really pressure testing what the signal, what signal we received from the interviewers, and really, kind of like diving deep into, what was shared, right? So if there is hesitation or if there is, not enough signal, why weren't we able to get that signal? And are we comparing apples to apples? And are we making sure that we're asking the same questions each time to each candidate, and being able to have that consistency across the board? And are we measuring those things, right? So I would encourage folks that are in roundups and that are doing, remote interviews and having your debriefs to really unpack those very closely and check for bias. Is there location bias, because we aren't able to be in person with these people? Do you have any reservations since you did interview this person over, video, when you normally would have met them in person? Are there any hesitations there? And really start to dig at those levers to see if we can overcome those and try to address those fears and concerns.
Yeah, that is so spot on, Evan. I think the debrief's like my favorite part of the entire interview process, because you can be so much more methodical and strategic in that room with everyone in the room that met that individual and all had different experiences. We also didn't really make a shift in our questions. They're still the same. What we really are trying to focus on is the pre-brief. So we do something, I'm sure other companies do this, is where the hiring manager sends out focus areas to the interview panel and make sure everyone has clear roles and responsibilities and knows their focus areas. But also the hiring manager restates what they're looking for and emphasizes what it is outside of the job description that they want the most, rather than just all the bullet points on a job description. And I think that's even more important now than ever, especially since virtual, is to really revisit your focus areas and align on what the hiring manager and the team wants, but also making sure that it's being communicated constantly before you meet a candidate. So because every time you meet candidates, your role changes a little bit. You thought your must-haves were must-haves, and all of a sudden they became nice-to-haves. And so keeping that feedback loop open with your interview panel and making sure like every week when you meet new candidates, reminding them what you're looking for and what you want.
And just going off of that, in terms of candidates, I do want to ask a few specific questions for the candidates out there. What advice would you have for folks who are looking for their next job right now? What are remote specific ways that they can stand out?
I would say this. Oh, go for it, Dave.
We don't see this a lot, but using video, right? And we encourage we don't require hiring managers to do this, but Fadi, in your last answer, you described bringing job descriptions to life. We strongly encourage hiring managers and teams to create videos that help illustrate and illuminate what life would be like working on a particular team at Gitlab for candidates who are considering, and that becomes a great reusable asset when you're marketing a role, either broadly to a network or one-to-one via direct outreach to passive candidates who you're interested in and see a strong alignment with. I think a great idea for a candidate who's considering a career opportunity at a company would be make your own video that you share with the company that helps bring you to life for a recruiter in a 2-minute snippet that helps demonstrate your communication skills and shows that you've researched Udemy or Airbnb or Gitlab or whatever company that you're considering joining as a way to help yourself stand out.
I was going to say, at least for Udemy, and I can't speak for every company, almost every role at Udemy is cross-functional. You have a lot of cross-functional partners. And so a lot of questions are going to be related to that. Like, tell me about a time when you led a project that was cross-functional. What was your part? How did you execute? So on and so forth. My best advice to every candidate out there is focus on the how. Like, how did you do things? How were you involved? How did you get people to move around things? How was the change management plan? What were all the things that went into it that made you stand out in that scenario? Because don't just tell me the what. I really want to know how and why you did things. And I think sometimes we forget to do that. And especially now that since you're virtual, like my advice to you is become a really good storyteller. Like that is the best thing you can do right now, is really figure out how to tell your story in a way that's articulate, but also get straight to the point and really explain to that person in front of you, here's how I did it and here's why I did it.
Yeah, +1. I think that's great feedback and advice. And I think another thing to consider also is don't be afraid when you're interviewing with the hiring manager or the interview team to ask clarification, to seek feedback, to as you're going through those interviews, to say, did that answer your question, or would you like me to explain more? It's a two-way conversation, right? And so it's meant to be, a dialogue. It's meant to be, if we were working together, how would we problem solve together? And so part of that is, asking and answering questions. And so my feedback would be, don't be afraid to say, to ask questions, and to say, do you want me to help clarify that, or would you like me to say more? Because I think otherwise you end up running on and talking, for a very long time. And so you just want to watch for that a little bit.
I'm hearing a lot of just, showing who you are with your story, even trying videos, and also checking in with the interviewer. Those are all very actionable tips for all the candidates out there. Thank you. I think it's time to move on to part 3, which is strategy and systems, right? And Evan, I really want to ask you the first question, which is that, your teams at Airbnb just experienced a huge process change and subsequent communications cascade that helped your teams pivot on a dime in 2 weeks and move completely to remote hiring. Is there advice or framework you can share with our audience around what a comms strategy and systems timeline would look like?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Thanks, Kerry, for that. So I think anytime that you have a large process change in general, for any situation, whether it's COVID-19 and remote interviewing, or Cambridge Analytica and needing to pivot to spin up special initiatives, whatever the case may be, I guess the way that I think about the overall framework is to really define what the problem statement is and identify who are the key stakeholders that we need to project manage this sprint. And so in general, in this specific case with, switching to remote interviewing, I think about who are going to be the impacted folks involved. There's recruiters, there's sourcers, there's our coordination teams, there's hiring managers, there are interviewers who are on the interview loops, potentially our IT teams who are going to help us leverage the video support, video interviewing support through our technology. Leadership, right, to get input for process review, and internal comms teams, legal teams, talent partners. So there's a lot of different stakeholders that I think it's first important to really understand who is going to be directly impacted by this, and how can we get all these people into a room. And then next, really establishing, who are going to be the POCs for this framework, who's the overall POC, who's the business POC, who's the recruiting POC, and really define roles and responsibilities and try to get as clear as possible about what the milestones you're looking to achieve are and what those deliverables are, and set a time frame so that you can hold each other accountable and track and measure progress. I think next, I think about comms planning. So who, in this instance, who do we need to communicate to? What are we trying to communicate, and how will we communicate it, and when? And so there's just generally developing comms to candidates, right, from our coordination or recruiting teams. So first understanding, do you have any accommodations or needs, as we've now changed this interview from, in person to remote. Here's kind of what to expect, and here's what this process will look like for you as a candidate. Here's the how-tos on how to set up your laptop and get logged into Zoom, and how to download any tools that you may need. Providing a virtual, a virtual overview of the interview process. And then special considerations like architecture, whiteboarding. We're doing whiteboarding through Zoom, which has been helpful. And then there's developing comms to internal interviews and hiring managers, right? So sharing with hiring managers and internal interviewing teams, hey, we have a process change, and in 2 weeks, we're going to be moving from X to Y. Here's the action items that you need to know. Here's some talking points that you can share with the candidates, when you're on the calls with them. And here's some best practices and candidate experience tips to make sure that, this goes as smoothly as possible. And then lastly, I think about like comms to recruiters and sourcers. So, once this team has, kind of fully baked out the process, talking through what the process changes are, making sure that we have our candidate communications just really buttoned up, that we are also constantly gathering feedback from the recruiters and sourcers that are interacting with the candidates on the front lines to determine how is this going. Talking through how virtual roundups might be different as well. And then I think last, the other things when you're making a large process change like this, having daily syncs with the sprint planning team, and gathering regular feedback from everybody involved, and conducting like ongoing reviews of process. And I think like Dave mentioned earlier, like, making sure that you're constantly seeking that constant input and feedback so that if there's changes needed, that you can iterate and be able to pivot. And then I think the last thing I think about is like, how might we incorporate this into the future? Maybe for folks that we might have flown in for an interview, right? Maybe we want to do a remote interview, to save a little bit of money on travel, or, what can we learn from this process and how can we further incorporate this? How is this going to evolve our industry, like moving forward? So.
Thanks for sharing that. It feels like with Airbnb, you all committed. You really made a decision that this is happening, and you triaged all the things that had to happen, starting with even comms planning. You first focused on candidates, then you went internally to interviewers and hiring managers, and then ultimately gave comms to the recruiters and sourcers who are, again, keeping up that pipeline, which we've discussed as pretty important to keep up during this time. Fadi, you went through a pretty similar process with Udemy. Anything you would like to add or expand on?
No, Evan said pretty much everything we did as well, and it was pretty spot on. I think as Evan was speaking, I started thinking to myself, and one of the things that I've noticed is like, when it comes to comms, I want our team to get creative too around this, because I think some people are just sick and tired of always getting comms from recruiting or the people team, and it's nice to get it from someone else. And so an idea that popped in my head was, how do we get the managers that are doing really well with this remote onboarding, remote interviewing, all that, like, how do we get them to communicate? How do we get them to share best practices and open up the feedback loop? Because sometimes people want to hear from their peers on their own teams. And I think that's something we need to start doing more and more of, is like getting creative with our comms. Who is actually sending the comms? Who does it come from? Is something that I want to challenge my team on doing as well. Because to Evan's point, we've done all those things, but things are still dropping on our end, to be honest. Like, there are still a lot of Zoom issues. And then when we refer people to the comms or email or some sort of like document that we created, they're like, oh, this is my first time seeing this. And it's like, okay, but it's been like 2 weeks that we've been working on this. So like, it's an iterative process. There's no perfect way of doing this, but I think creativity is super key right now. And to Evan's point about saving costs a little bit, we're actually looking at that right now. We flew so many people, like recruiting and just people in general, the highest cost of every single expense for a company. And this is actually a blessing. It's allowing us to see, like, how can we be creative in our interviewing? Why do we have to fly every single individual out here? Why can't we just do it virtually? And now we're proving to ourselves we can. We're actually building out a global talent strategy for 2021 and beyond. And this is something we're looking at, like, what is the cost of personnel and rent? And what is the ROI behind that individual? And how can I like save more money there while still utilizing my current team? Things like that. Those are all questions that are being asked right now because of this current situation. And I think these are really good questions to ask.
Those answers were comprehensive on both fronts. The only thing I can add would be the importance of documentation. And I heard it multiple times from Evan in his descriptions. For GitLab, the thing I would capture, if you're not already doing it as a company, use or create some form of a handbook, an operating system for your company. I've been in prior companies that had them as intranet, internal type tools. With GitLab, it's very, very public, and it becomes something that is externally viewable by the world. I remember when I was a candidate at GitLab and I was reading and studying its handbook, while I was going through my interview loop, the description changed, that this would be, if you were to print this handbook out, it would be 2,000 some odd pages. During the time I was in the loop, it changed from 2,000 to 3,000. And that was 6 months, 8 months ago. Now it's up to north of 5,000 searchable pages of information that is accessible to everyone. And we keep the tool stack super simple. Google Docs, Zoom, Slack, and our own product, GitLab, are the 4 core tools of the company. So that way, every time you're in an interaction, you have a very clear understanding of what's expected and what's happening where, and how to access information that you know and can come to expect will be captured asynchronously, even if you're not part of the meeting. You can go back to the calendar invite, pull up the agenda, and know exactly what was discussed, and usually find a YouTube recording of the meeting. We actually share those publicly too for the vast majority of them. Believe it or not, people watch them on a channel called GitLab Unfiltered. So it's a great way to showcase transparency, but it's also a great way to have knowledge capturing and knowledge sharing in a way that very much levels the playing field and allows people to participate asynchronously around the world.
I love that. And I mean, one of our registrant questions was around global recruiting, right? Specifically, how do you maintain all this globally when there's so much happening right now uniquely in all these locations around the world? Dave, you shared your tool stack. Evan and Fadi, are there any additional platforms, tech you can just share to everyone for them to also help move on to remote hiring?
I think from the global piece, like, it's so important to have to obviously, you know, make time for APAC and EMEA counterparts, and to be able to have those syncs on a regular, consistent basis to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that we're all communicating the same thing. So it's so much of it is about collaboration, teamwork, like making sure that again, coming back to, like, do we have all of the right people in the room, and are all of the stakeholders that need to be at the table sitting here? And, you know, are we all agreeing on, like, what the process workflow is going to look like before we ship it out? So I think it's extra important to, like, over communicate and continue to, like, involve all of the right people, so that once we do cascade, whether it's changes, you know, updates, et cetera, that everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, that's super important. We have that as well. I have a recruiting team in Dublin, and I have a recruiting team in Ankara, Turkey, and one massive time zone difference. And making sure, like, we're available for them as well is definitely important, since most of our recruiting is in San Francisco. So I agree with Evan's point. I think the other thing I would add is right now we're revisiting all our tools that we use and really thinking about the ROI behind them, because some are super valuable and some are not. And, like, Kerry did not put me up to this, but I'm going to say this anyways. Searchlight's a great tool to use right now, more than ever, because it's streamlining our reference checks. And it's actually helped me a lot as a hiring manager myself, really look at the candidates that I'm assessing and if I'm being too harsh or not. And then when I review their feedback from their past managers or past employees or colleagues that talked about them, my feedback was been pretty spot on. So it's really helpful to have more data points, especially now more than ever. So my advice to all hiring leaders and hiring or talent leaders out there is to really look at your tools and see what is the ROI behind them. And is it a must-have or a nice-to-have? And make sure you're investing in must-haves, especially now more than ever.
Wow, I really appreciate that. So thank you, Fadi. Thank you all so much for just sharing all of your candid takes on the questions so far. We have a few minutes left, and I'm going to just go ahead and go into Q&A. We have one on what are the external and internal signals that strategy planning teams are using to speed up, slow down, freeze, or unfreeze hiring?
So we're going through this right now. One of the things we're looking at is revenue. What's the revenue that's coming in? Because the revenue that comes in is basically what we would use to push out to get candidates and get new employees. And so for us right now, Udemy has two sides. And I can only speak about Udemy at the moment. We have a B2B product and a B2C product. Our B2C is growing like no other because our product is online learning. And so because schools are shut down, because students are forced to be at home, they're on our product more than ever now. And the user base is up 50, 60% this month alone. On the B2B side, it's up as well. And there are a lot of companies investing in Udemy because they're remote now and they want the best tools out there for online learning so that they can learn from their own home, since their L&D team can't do in-person courses. So we saw an uptick in that too. And so for us, we're looking at that revenue model and seeing like, where do we need to keep going and push, and where do we need to slow down to ensure that there is still cash coming into the company with this unknown of when this is going to be all over. So that's one of our biggest indicators, what's the revenue that's actually coming back to our company.
Yeah, I would
having that pulse on the, go ahead, Evan.
I mean, for me, it's making sure that all of so that FP&A and talent partners and recruiting and business leads are sitting together on a regular basis, like having conversations about headcount planning and forecasting, and making sure that we're aligning all of our, priorities and, kind of goals together in one quorum. And so for me, that's been really helpful, is to make sure that we're all staying very closely connected, having regular syncs and keeping each other up to date on as things, go one way or the other.
I think it's a great time to be responsible about hiring. I'm always mindful about never wanting to see a company or a team get ahead of its skis. Our number one priority is enabling the success of our current team, and then thinking about how to thoughtfully and strategically grow each of our teams in a way that is very much in line with the forward-looking revenue and other indicators that we see in our customer behavior and marketplaces. And so long as we can do that, we'll continue to grow. And our plan is to continue to grow through this period, but to grow responsibly and thoughtfully.
Yeah, best wishes to you all. I wish all of you all grow continually and successfully throughout this. I do love ending on a high note. So if there's anything you can share on the silver linings in this experience.
I would say on my side, I've just loved how humanity has come all together now more than ever. Just like this call right here, 3 different individuals coming together that have never met before and just sharing best practices. And I've seen that everywhere, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. People are sharing so much knowledge now more than ever. And I think that's one of the best silver linings that I've seen, is that like humanity is reminding itself that like we're all after the same dreams and goals and aspirations, but at the end of the day, we can't do it alone. There is this African proverb that I've lived by, which is if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think we're finally doing that as a humanity.
I think we're starting to, that's great, Fadi, thanks. I think we're starting to, as we move more towards becoming 21st century companies and evolving the way that we work and thinking about, what is the most efficient way to do things, and what are going to be the best things for our employees and for our teams. I think we're starting to, this has, forced us to rethink, where the industry might be going and how we might evolve, and what do distributed workforces look like, and what does more remote interviewing look like, and also how do we maintain those connections and those intimate settings together without losing the authenticity of those moments. So for me, it's I think the silver lining is knowing that this could help us evolve and really grow in our industry in new and insightful ways.
I'm personally filled with just gratitude, and to be in an environment that's been operating all remote and done such thoughtful curation of the tools and practices and methodologies to enable remote-based work and to create a team experience that is enriching in a virtual way is very, very powerful. And to be able to share that amongst GitLab team members and create opportunities for future GitLabbers is a super cool way in which for us to be able to give back. So excited about the prospect of how we navigate through all of this together. And no one has a crystal ball to know how it plays out, but I know we will get through it together.
I love that, getting through this together. I think that's the perfect way to end this. So Fadi, Dave, Evan, I think I speak for all of us watching, heartfelt thank you for sharing your experience and perspectives with us. And to everyone watching, thank you for spending your time with us today. If it was helpful, please leave your feedback to us. You'll get it right after you exit this webinar, or you can just send me an email at Kerry@Searchlight.ai. So stay safe, everyone, stay healthy, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.